I don't want to waste your time, so there won't be an intro. Over the past few seasons, Rainbow has become increasingly defender-sided. This is partly due to new philosophies in map design, which is why the 3 latest additions to the map pool, Clubhouse, Villa, and Kafe, are also the ones that are the most defender-sided, but it also has to do with the newly released operators, where for the past year or so, the defenders got the better end of the deal. And this has led to quite a few lopsided map sets for the Invitational, where teams really struggled on attack, especially on Clubhouse, Villa, and Kafe. But I think that there's a solution. You just have to play Montagne. But before we can understand why Montagne is actually borderline OP, we need to understand the reason why attacking is so difficult on those maps. And based on the fact that on Kafe, Clubhouse, and Villa, it's not just individual sites that are defender-sided, but rather the entire map, we already got us a clue. There seem to be certain features on a map design level that are just inherently defender-favored. Okay, so what are the similarities between the sites on those maps? I think you can break it down into 3 main factors. First, all of these maps offer very powerful, but at the same time reasonably safe spots for defenders to play in. And these are what I call power positions. I'm talking about Rafters on Clubhouse, Red Spot on Kafe, and Astro on Villa, for example. Also, note how none of these spots are actually part of the objective, so even if you lose control of them, the round is not necessarily over. The second factor is also somewhat related to the first one. All of these maps are fairly big, but more importantly, there are always a bunch of long hallways without any cover. And a lot of the time, there are even entire areas of the map that are basically no man's land. I'm talking about Piano and also Bar on Kafe, and Garage on Clubhouse, for example. And it's not a coincidence that 2 of the power positions I talked about earlier are located right at the end of one of those no man's land areas. Attackers just hate dealing with long and open space, because in the current meta, the defenders always have some kind of information gadgets in these spots, which means that once the attackers commit to pushing, the defenders will always know about it and can just use Pika's advantage to win the gunfights. The third reason why maps are defender-sided lies in the other meta strategy that defenders can play. Instead of focusing on information gathering, defenders can also choose to focus on information denial. I'm referring to the various roam strategies, where you play Mute, Mozzie, and Vigil, and then continuously shoot drones and fall back, in order to waste as much time and utility as possible. This is something where SSG, for example, really shines, because they basically play that kind of style whenever it's possible. And of course, they are the ones who came up with the most prominent version of that style, namely the SSG Clubhouse Basement Roam. But it's also pretty effective on Kafe, Consulate, and also kind of on Villa. Okay, so we know a few of the reasons behind heavily defender-sided maps. Strong power positions, a lot of long hallways and open areas, and big maps that are difficult to drone against the Mute Mozzie combo. Now, let's take a look at how Montagne is going to help with that. First, the power positions. Well, they just lose a lot of their power. Look at the situation. Here, Fnatic is trying to play the red spot shield, which usually forces the attackers to waste a lot of time and utility. But with Montagne, Pengu can just walk up and there's nothing that the 2 Fnatic players can really do about it. And here we can see the same thing on Clubhouse Rafters. As long as the power position is one where you don't really have great crossfire opportunities, in this case because CC ball is open, the defender now has to worry about 2 different angles, and it's just impossible to survive here. The way Montagne continues to play out this round also shows the kind of mindset you should have when playing Monty or Blitz. Instead of thinking about Montagne as a passive shield, you want to think about him as an aggressive battering ram, because in order to be effective, you need to pose some kind of threat to the defender. Alright, so that should give you an idea on how to handle power positions. Next up are long hallways and open areas. And you kind of already saw that, but this is where Montagne really excels at. There's just not much the defenders can do against a Montagne walking up towards them. C4 takes too long to deploy, and impacts don't really do a lot of damage. Look at this situation. If the defenders have 90 control, the attackers usually just can't pressure games at all, unless you're playing Montagne, which means that you can get into positions that no other attacker can get into. And look at how much attention Montagne is drawing to himself, which naturally creates a lot of space for his teammates to work with. G2 actually end up losing that round, by the way, but I think it still serves as a strong example of why Montagne is really good at dealing with long hallways and open areas. And lastly, we have the mute Mozzie roam. The strong thing about Montagne here is that he somewhat doubles as a drone. You can easily just face check a bunch of rooms without risking a lot. As you can see here, NIP doesn't even bother droning out the top floor, maybe because of the Mozzie pairs that are lying around, and instead they just have Montagne face check everything. And I think especially when it comes to roam clearing, Montagne is really strong, because his biggest weakness, a proper crossfire, is very hard to pull off when you're roaming. Usually there are only 2 or 3 roamers, and most of the time they are actively trying to avoid gunfights in order to waste more time. And with Montagne, you can kind of abuse that, like NIP did here. If you go for a proper roam clear against the SSG Clubhouse basement roam, for example, you should be a lot faster if you bring Montagne. So as you can see, Montagne provides pretty strong answers to the factors that usually make a map really difficult to attack. You can just run towards power positions and force the defenders off. You can cross long hallways and open areas very easily. And you can clear the map by face checking whenever it's difficult to drone. And based on the clips you've seen throughout the video, this is not just a theory, it actually works in Pro League games. And I think it would also work on a bunch of other maps to counter setups that rely on power positions, like Garage on Bank, or to counter wide roam setups, like on Concert Garage for example. But I certainly think that on Clubhouse, Kafe and Villa, Montagne's low pick rate is not representative of his true power level. I'm not saying that he should be picked every single round, because if the defenders catch on and start to play Echo, Legion and Smoke, Montagne just doesn't have a good time. So it's not that Montagne has no counter, but the key insight here is that countering Montagne largely happens in the pick phase, not during the actual round. If you happen to play a comp that just doesn't run Echo, Legion and Smoke, and that happens relatively often recently, you are honestly kind of screwed. And with the 6-pick phase, defenders won't even know that you're trying to play Montagne, so you're free to just wait until the conditions are in your favor. And now I can already see people asking, what about crossfires though? You just set one up, and Montagne can't clear it without exposing himself to danger. The theory does sound really nice, but honestly, that's just not how Rainbow works in reality. Crossfire positions are determined by the map layout, so Montagne, and more importantly the rest of his team, already know about those spots in advance, and then something like this happens. Montagne is facing a crossfire on top white, but his team just rotates a player to white window to clear it. And sure, that was just one example, but setting up effective crossfires against a Montagne is actually pretty difficult. Okay, so those were a lot of technical, game-related reasons for why Montagne is strong, but there's also a pretty big psychological factor. Pros absolutely hate playing against Montagne. And besides the guys who are playing Montagne from time to time, there wouldn't be a single pro player that would be sad if Montagne and Blitz were deleted tomorrow. Especially as a roamer, you just feel utterly helpless, and your first reaction is simply to run away because you can't be bothered to deal with that. So there's definitely some kind of mental effect in play, where you might be able to tilt your opponents by playing and winning with Montagne, which cannot be understated if you're playing a 5-map series, for example. Alright, so why is Montagne sitting on a 3% pick rate then? Fair question. I think part of it is because pros just haven't realized his strength. But it's also that playing Montagne is pretty difficult, because he's just unlike any other operator, and learning how to play him optimally requires quite a bit of time. Time that could be spent refining your default strategies. And at the end of the day, some players and teams probably just aren't suited to playing Montagne, so that investment would have been a pretty big waste of time. But I hope that this video made a compelling case for why you should try to come up with a few Monty strats, specifically for attacks that you're struggling with anyways. And who knows, maybe you can finally unleash your inner shield hero. Alright, that's it for the video. I hope I was able to make you think. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.